welcome to Book Club Live. We are super excited to be talking with Lorien Lawrence, the author of The Stitchers. So amazing. I just listened to it on audio. It was wild. I feel like it was teeming with nostalgia, even though like I've never read it before, but it felt that way. So we're going to talk all about it. And we are going to be taking your questions live. But first of all, let's kind of introduce everyone who is here. So we'll go to Lorien last. So first of all, head over to Adriana. Just introduce yourself. Tell us about like your books and we'll move on.
So, hi everyone, I'm Adriana Cuevas. I am the author of The Total Eclipse of Nestor Lopez and Cuba in My Pocket, which releases September 21st, rapidly approaching. But I super love The Stitchers and its main character, who I feel like I'm going to start a GoFundMe for so she can move to another town because it's needed.
Okay, but if she moves to another town, then where are the stories going to come from?
I don't know. We got questions for Lorien, I think.
And
already.
I feel like, yeah, we'll have, okay, well, the questions are coming in. But Josh, what about you?
I feel like the spookiness might follow her wherever she goes, actually. My name is Josh Roberts. I'm the author of The Witches of Willow, Cove, which I think you can see behind me. And I'm super excited to be here.
And just FYI, our next book for September is going to be The Witches of Willow Cove by Josh Roberts. So, yay. And Jacqueline, what about you?
Hi, I'm Jacqueline West. I am the author of the series, The Books of Elsewhere, the duology, The Collectors, a mystery and mystery writing guide called Digging Up Danger, and my latest is a middle grade ghost story mystery called Long Lost, which just came out in May. So that's me.
And it's so good. And actually, we just talked about it a couple of months ago on Book Club Live. So check out that recording if you missed it. I'm Kim Ventrella, author of middle grade novels like Skeleton Tree. Of course, I've got like my covers ready. I don't know why y'all aren't prepared with your flashing your covers, but Bone Hollow. Hello, future me. And if you love those scary stories, don't turn out the lights. So all kinds of books. But we are here to talk about The Stitchers tonight, which is just amazing. So especially if you love spooky middle grade, like we all do, this is like classic. And I feel like it's just like pitch perfect middle grade too. Like when it flows like so beautifully. You're right there with these characters. Quinn / Parker, because sometimes like Mike calls her Parker. So I'm like Quinn, Parker, what? But they're like investigators and they have this mystery to solve in their neighborhood, Goody Lane. So Lorien, we're going to go to you now. So why don't you tell us a little bit for maybe people who haven't picked up The Stitchers yet, like tell us a little bit about it and then we'll dive into our questions and viewer questions.
I do have it next to me. So here is the paperback, actually, the paperback cover. And it is about Quinn Parker, 13-year-old track star. You can see her running with Mike, her neighbor. And in the background, this is the cover is based on one of the first scenes in the book where they're running through their neighborhood and they notice that their neighbors are watching them from the windows. And there's something seemingly like inhuman about them. And that was one of the first scenes I wrote or that I kind of thought of when I was writing the book and when I was coming up with the idea. So I was super psyched that they used that image for the cover. But they realize that their neighbors don't age and they start to investigate and start snooping. And I think that's the part that has a bit of like a retro throwback vibe, that like meddling kids thing, you know, like kids on bikes, kids snooping, kids being everywhere they're not supposed to be. And that's exactly the kind of story that I loved when I was growing up. And that was kind of the vibe I wanted to capture with The Stitchers and with this series in general. So they investigate and they end up finding out the truth because kids are smart and they're much smarter than adults who have no idea in the town what's actually going on with these people. And then when they uncover the mystery, they realize it's like way worse than even what they had thought, and that they're in real danger. And so they have to like thwart their neighbor's evil plan and kind of put it to bed, all while also you know, get into track meets and having school dances and almost first kisses and all of that like ooey gooey kind of middle school stuff.
Yeah, the middle school stuff was so perfect. I felt like every scene, you're like, oh yeah, like you must really, you just channel that middle school vibe so perfectly. So are you like a secret middle schooler at heart still, or?
I think so. I don't think I ever kind of grew up, and I teach middle school. I teach 7th grade, and I have taught 8th grade before, and I don't put, everyone asks me, I don't put my students in my books because that's weird and creepy, way creepier than oldies. But I do but I do try to like channel how they speak and like how they interact in those really awkward moments. I try, and the banter, because they bicker. Middle schoolers are just like, they love a bit of banter. I don't think they know the word banter, but they do it constantly. And so that kind of back and forth, I think is super fun to write. And yeah, so I think maybe it's because I'm a middle school teacher. I feel like I've kind of always been in middle school.
I think you may have just invented the plot of a future Fright Watch book, the creepy middle school teacher who puts her kids in books. Write stories about her kids.
That would make me like the super villain, though.
Yes, the mastermind behind it all.
Which would be perfect, I feel like. And by the way, I actually brought my wig tonight. I was like considering wearing it just because of the theme of the oldies. And then I was like, yeah.
Oh my God, I wish you did.
Maybe later, maybe I'll slip down and then I'll come up.
You need like a big, like a gown though. Be as very glam.
I do. So I know we have lots of questions about, you kind of mentioned like the adorable romance, and we want to hear more about the oldies and this evil thing that's lurking on Goody Lane. But I know everybody has questions, so I'm going to send it over to Adriana. I know you have a burning question you want to ask.
Well, I always, the reason I loved the Stitchers so much was, one, like you said, Lauren, you do an amazing job of like portraying those middle schoolers, and it's super creepy. Oh my gosh, it's super creepy. And I adored that too. But like, it's really emotional as well. And I guess I was wondering, the whole thread with Quinn's dad, if that was something you had originally planned to put in the book, or if it was something that you added later. Because that just like, yes, it's this horror novel, but it has like this emotional depth that kind of took me by surprise, honestly. So I was wondering if that was originally your plan.
Love that question. It was not my plan. My plan was to write a spooky story, the kind of book I wanted to read when I was growing up. And I knew I wanted to do that. And then when I was kind of starting to conceptualize this idea, I had just moved back to my hometown, like the neighborhood I had grown up in. My husband and I bought our first house, and it was on a street where I got the inspiration from Goody Lane. There was a creepy pond at the end of it that allegedly has had a body in it, allegedly in all caps. So in the town I grew up in was like super haunted. There are legends of witches and ghosts and all of these creepy things. And I kind of wanted to write something, but I wasn't sure what. And then pretty much as soon as I moved back to my hometown, my own father passed away suddenly. And I guess I just merged those two things together. And that's kind of what I've always loved about middle grade horror, and like horror that's meant for kids, is I feel like it does have this emotional thread going through it that adult horror and even young adult horror doesn't necessarily have. Because you can get real bleak with young adult and with adult things. Because theoretically grown-ups can handle those kinds of emotions. And with kids, we give like a softer touch. And I feel like I needed, as an adult going through this grieving process, like I needed that softer touch for myself. So I think it started off like, ooh, I want to write something scary. And then this horrible thing happened. And I ended up subconsciously weaving them both together.
But I love how you never let go of the humor. Like you said, like it's a soft touch, but it's also like this humorous thread that's going throughout the Stitchers. Because I mean, yes, it's like very poignant, and like you feel the emotions of her having lost her father. But then when I don't know if this is like spoil, like I don't want to spoil anything, but let's just say he's like not totally gone, and it's possible like parts of him show up again, and it's like that's the type of horror that is so like if you
Parts
really
of
think,
him. Parts of him
come back. So if you really think too hard about it, you're like, wow, that's dark. But then like when you read it, it's like pretty funny though. Like there's this other side of it that's kind of humorous.
Because it's ridiculous. It is the most ridiculous idea I've probably ever had. And I'm still in shock that out of everything I've written, this is the one that got published first. I have way more mainstreamy kind of things that all got rejected a million times over. And this one is my little oddball monster story. And it's the one that got published. But yeah, it's funny because it's ridiculous. It is a ridiculous story.
I had to read that I literally read that section over like 2 or 3 times. And that's not the kind of reader I am. I actually read pretty quickly and like skim. But I was skimming and I went, wait, what? Read it over again. I'm like, she did that. Wow. It was awesome.
Right. And I know, Adriana, there's some advice that you've given before in our talks with kids, which is like, don't censor your ideas when you're putting them down. Just be as ridiculous as you want to be. And I feel like
Lorien was.
And that's like what is so awesome about it though, right? Like it's just, yeah, it's like uncensored, like unfiltered. And I mean, who doesn't love that humorous touch in horror, like especially with middle grade? So fun. And I know I can see Jacqueline is dying to get in here, so I'm going to let you in, but there's too many things to ask about.
Well, I know because we did another chat once that you said the main oldie, is her name B? I'm forgetting at the moment. Okay, yes, that she is based on your grandmother, which I think is incredible, like this glamorous, if you don't call her Glamma, like I'm kind of disappointed. Anyway, your glamorous grandma. Does she know? I don't think we asked you at the time. Does she know that she was your inspiration? And how does she feel about that? No, she doesn't.
She does not know. I think she would only care about it's not a secret. My grandma is incredibly vain, has always been obsessed with youth. Like when I was a kid, she would tell everybody she was 80 when she was like 60 because she wanted the reaction of, oh my gosh, she looks so good. What are you doing? And so I asked my mom the other day, because it was just recently her birthday. I was like, how old is she? She's like, I don't even know anymore. I have to like look at her license, because she just has been lying about her age literally her whole life. And it's everything had to be perfect. Like she's in her 90s now, so she's kind of letting it go a little more, but the vanity and the wanting to be young, those are strong with her in that. So I think if I told her that she was the inspiration for B, I think she would really just care about, well, is B pretty? How does she look? And that, yeah. So she definitely was my inspiration for B, that glam. I'm going to dress up to go to the grocery store. I'm going to wear my pearls. I'm going to wear all my jewels. Her black, like volcano kind of hair, beehive thing. That was my grandma's hairdo, like forever. All just like completely solidified on her head. And yeah, just very super glam.
I love it. I also because like women in general, and I think especially older women, we see as so unthreatening, you know, like sometimes they even just become invisible. And so I love that she is kind of the mastermind behind all of this. Just loved how you turned all of that on its head. And I thought it was funny too that the other grandmother character is this super realistic, like very sweet grandmother, but I know that isn't based on your actual grandma.
No, I didn't have the best relationship with my B-like grandma for obvious reasons, but I was always really envious when I would hang out with my friends and their my college roommate's grandma is who I kind of based Grandma Jane on. She would come to visit us and bake us banana bread, and every Sunday she would bake apple pie, and which was just the sweetest soul. And kind of the way Grandma Jane looks was based on my friend's grandma. So I kind of always wanted that like sweet, gonna bake you things and I'm gonna show you love and all of this. And I had B, but I guess it's a good thing I had B because she inspired my super villain.
She sounds kind of epic though, and like amazing. And I've never heard that like someone lying up about their like my grandma was 39 for like ever since from 39 until she was gone. She was 39.
I think she did that originally, and then she realized she got a bigger reaction if she aged up by a ridiculous amount, and then had the you look so good you have, because she didn't have wrinkles, like she really didn't forever. So she could have gotten away with all kinds of lies, but
I feel like that's maybe the origin story of B here. Like that's the hidden backstory.
Yeah.
So as someone who grew up in a funeral home, I was highly impressed with the realism. Maybe not the entire realism, but the depiction of the funeral home and the creeping around and everything. And I think it's one of the things that you do really well is ratcheting up the tension in all of the scenes, especially as the story builds. I'm just curious about your research for not just that scene, but all just in general, like what your process is. How much of it is just kind of made up as you go along, and how much of it is you sort of looking in. So for example, the Goody Pond legend and everything. So where do you draw the line between drawing from inspiration from the real world and just kind of going from there?
I think it kind of all blurs together, because where I base that on, there is like Stratford, Connecticut, there is this town witch named Goody Bassett, which is where I got Goody Lane from. And she was killed way before the Salem witch trials. Like she was one of the first women who like allegedly confessed to witchcraft, and she apparently haunts the library, and her head was buried somewhere different than something else. I'm probably giving away spoilers by going here.
That's a very Fear Street sort of solution there.
I know, when I was watching the new one, I was like, oh my gosh, if her hand is the power source, I'm going to throw all my stitchers and just but like the idea of having something like buried somewhere else because they were so afraid of this woman was fascinating to me. So that was based on folklore. There are legends of, the Lady in the Lake and things like that I also loved reading about when I was a kid. There was the actual news story of someone whose body was found in that pond. And then after, we just had a storm in Connecticut, but the last like big storm, it caused all these trees to just overlap and almost break, but not fully, all the way over the pond, creating this super creepy effect. And I remember I was walking around with my husband and my dog, and I was just like, wow, it looks extra creepy. Like you have no idea what's lurking in that water. And then that turned into the what if game that I know a lot of us play, which is what if there was something lurking beneath the water? What if that was the fountain of youth? What if there was this thing and that thing? So I think it ends up all kind of merging together with folklore and like the town's history, and then kind of like my own questions that I want answered as I write.
You do a lot of you post on your Instagram page a lot of really like cool spooky stuff as you go around. And so have you always been into not just spooky middle grade, but spooky stories and folklore and legends? Forever.
And I think because in kindergarten was the first time I ever heard scary stories to tell in the dark. My librarian read it to us, and the school library was in a basement. I know, I see the face. It was the 80s, and it just was like, sure, this sounds like a great idea. We'll just read this to a bunch of kindergartners. And so I remember we were all completely frozen, but also electrified, because there was like something about those stories. And especially with that little caveat of like, might be true, I was kind of hooked. And then it went into, like Benicula books, which were a bit softer, but still had something odd happening. And then, of course, I got into R.L. Stine as soon as I could get my hands on them. And then I kind of gave up the spooky for a little while. I feel like literary fiction in the publishing world was like huge when I was in college. And I felt like, oh, I have to write these like big important things, or like quote unquote issue books or something basically important. And horror was not thought of as being important. I think we're starting to get there. People are noticing us a little bit more, which is good. But I felt like I couldn't really write the stuff that was fun for me until I moved back to Stratford, and until, my father passed away, and I kind of put all these pieces together and was like, you know what, forget all that other stuff. I just want to write what's fun and what I used to love to read. And that was the wacky little book that got published. So
yeah, I love that. It's like, oh, good.
I was to say, it's, there's something about that whole, the issues book thing where I feel like when I was young and as a reader, the things that resonated with me were the stories that were really interesting. And then oftentimes, like, you could confront your own issues with those stories in a way that was sort of more indirect. And I feel like that's the case with the Stitchers as well, because it is, in addition to being a horror story, a story about grief. And, I think that's one of the values of these types of genre stories, is that, people who wouldn't necessarily pick up a book about grief can pick up this book and enjoy it and still have that sort of cathartic experience that you get from reading literature that sort of deals with these topics.
That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think, horror in so many ways has to be really emotional, like no matter what type of horror it is. It's like, it's such an emotional investment for you as an author, I feel like, because you have to draw the reader in, and kind of as you're writing, I think you have to feel that fear. It's like getting to that place where you can make yourself afraid. It kind of does take like a big investment, and you're going to be touching on those really important emotions, because without that, we don't feel like the monster is like a credible threat if we don't like really connect with the characters. So yeah, I love that. And horror is so powerful. I know you're a middle school teacher. So are you like finding ways to introduce horror and kind of talk about that with your students, and what's their reaction?
Like 1,000%. Anytime I can put it in, and they know it about me. Like from the first day of school, I tell them, like, this is the genre I love. This is my wheelhouse. You might not like it, but we're gonna use bits and pieces of all different kinds of books. But you can really teach craft and, metaphors and tension and suspense and like a plot arc just beautifully with mysteries and with spooky things and scary things. And when I have a room full of kids who say, I hate reading, the second I'm like, okay, you hate reading, let me read you, Kim's story from Turn Out the Lights. And I purposely picked that book, and I chose 4 different stories for 4 different classes. And I had a lot of reluctant readers last year, and COVID just made everything even worse. And they just hated to read and said they hated to read. I read like the first 2 pages, and then I looked up and I was like, oh, wait, I forgot. You guys hate books, right? You won't stop. And it was just like they already had terror on their faces. And then it was, wait, but you can't stop. Like you have to. And that's one of the magical things about scary stories and spooky stories and mysteries and thrillers and all of those other pieces of genre fiction, is that you get those kids who think they don't like to read, and they're completely captivated and have to know what's next. And for me, that's like a super easy lesson on suspense and how that is an important plot tool and a plot device. And, they can look for that in a bits and pieces. I'm sorry, I just read the chat, and Josh said using bits and pieces as a Stitchers analogy. Did you know that was my original title? That was my original title.
That was your original title?
Yeah.
Oh, I like that title too. Yeah. And yeah, Stitchers is so perfect. And it's so funny because when I was reading the book, I would say it wasn't until like way after it should have clicked that I finally was like, oh, Stitchers. Yeah. Okay. Like that's where the title came from. So yeah, it's a really cool title. But yeah, so back to horror. It's so funny. I was actually just rewatching the first season of American Horror Story, and they have one of the characters is talking about how like all of these stories and myths and legends are just kind of our attempt to tackle the things that we're afraid of. Do you think that's part of this kind of visceral appeal of horror for readers of all ages? Or like, what do you think it is about horror that draws in those readers that maybe aren't otherwise like reading books?
I don't think they're conscious of it at all. I don't. The kids who read our books collectively, like middle grade readers, they're not usually very conscious or able to articulate into words. Like if I ask a class, like, why do you like this book, or what kind of books do you like? Sometimes they'll be like, I don't know, I just like that one, or I hate reading, but I liked that one. They have a really hard time articulating what it is, like what they find magical about a story. So I do think that this genre specifically is so, like you said, Kim, tied to emotion, whether it is emotion through something serious like grief, or if it is humor, or if it's just being scared and wanting to make sure that the main character is going to end up okay. Like that can get a kid through, the reading experience. And I see this genre, I have more success with getting reluctant readers to read scary stories than I do with any other genre. I think sometimes I get some kids who think they want sports books, and then they read some sports books because someone at one point told them, oh, you hate to read, but you like sports. Here's a book about baseball. And then they read it and they're like, this is deadly, because playing baseball is fun, but reading every single play that's happening, like it's painful to them. Whereas with kind of genre fiction, you don't know what's going to happen. You believe the character's going to make it out okay, but you don't know how. And so that kind of helps them make predictions and inferences and all of those things that get their brain working in a way that they don't even realize, which is kind of the beauty of it.
Yeah, I love it. I just want to remind people watching that we are taking viewer questions as well. So if you have a question, get that in the comments. But I know Adriana is just beating down this door to ask a question, so I'll send it over to her.
Well, I kind of thought of, I got like 3 in my head, but whatever. They keep coming and going. So let me latch onto one. With what you were just saying, though, because when I taught middle school, it was the exact same thing where those poor athletic kids would get identified and be like, here, let me toss a sports book at you. Because I had a kid one time actually say, well, miss, I like playing sports, but I don't like reading about them. And so I think what I'm wondering is, like, your kids reacting so well to the spooky stories. Do you think part of that is because, like, that's not really what's considered curriculum? Like, that's not really something that is provided to them in schools. And so I'm kind of wondering, like, your thoughts on maybe it's just because they've never viewed spooky stories as something that is even, I guess, worthy of a teacher giving them and saying, read this?
For sure. Or parents. Like,
yeah.
I do think that, like, I've had parents say to me before, like, or send me lengthy emails, why did you tell my child they could read this book for their independent reading? Because it's independent reading, they can read whatever they want.
Book.
Like, yeah, but they have a really hard time. And I think that is baggage left over from their school experience, where, when we were growing up, the choice reading wasn't really a thing unless you really were doing it outside of school. But curriculum now is slowly changing. Mm-hmm. Whereas if I want to teach you about metaphor, I could teach you about metaphor in any book. So choose your own adventure, and we'll just have you find metaphor you can find it in a sports book, you can find it in a romance, you can find it in a horror book, like whatever. And I think parents are having a hard time, giving that cash in a bookstore to a scary story because they don't fully believe that the teacher's going to let them read it, or that they're going to get the same stuff out of it. And so I do think a lot of kids are surprised when they're like, wait, I really can read that? And you're going to count it and you're going to let me? So there is some hesitation. And the thing with middle grade that I'm sure, I know you guys know, is that the parents and teachers and librarians are the ones buying the books and giving them and, shouting them out to kids. Whereas young adult, it's more the teenagers going to the bookstore and the library and finding their own stories. So, getting more teachers, librarians, and parents to see the benefit in letting kids choose, and that horror is a viable option. I'm hoping that starts to shift a little more.
Mm-hmm. Because I'm dying to know, what's your students' reaction to the fact that my 7th grade teacher is a published author. Because for me, like I've talked about in school visits, how that for me, that was my 4th grade teacher. And like that woman is a literal saint in my mind. I should have a shrine to her on my bookshelf. So if I sat in your classroom and you were like, here's my book, I would lose my mind. You would instantly be like my favorite teacher ever. But I think
you would be a legend for
yes.
sure. Yeah.
But at the same time, I think, we all have middle schoolers in our lives where, like, my son, we get met with okay, like some ambivalence. So I'm dying to know, though, like, what your students' reaction is.
I mean, ambivalence is like the word of middle school. So,
That's nice.
I mean, they're not, I do, like, if I have a creative writer, I just this morning got emailed by, she's now going to be a sophomore in high school, asking if she can come visit me because she wants to be an author, and she does look up to me in a very sweet way. But if they don't want to be authors, it's like, oh God, now she's going to push books at me from every single direction, because not only does she read them all the time, she likes to write them as well. But they think it's fun. They always ask me to read from it, and I refuse because that's weird. But it's in the library in our school, which is very sweet of our librarian. But I don't like to talk about it too much because, I don't know, I get shy. I don't want to be that teacher who's like, oh, hey, here's my book, buy it. That's weird.
No, you need like a teacher's assistant to be like, by the way.
Did you know?
Yeah. So one of the things that I love about the Stitchers and is the fact that it's really upper middle grade, and it's very like adult friendly too. I know it's written for middle readers, but the pacing and the suspense and all of that is very readable for an adult reader to come in. And I think that's maybe very distinctive of upper middle grade, where the kids are a little bit older, the plots are a little bit more sophisticated and longer. What drew you to upper middle grade, and were the characters in the Stitchers always the age that they are in the final product?
I guess because I've always taught 7th and 8th grade, I always felt like they didn't really have a huge selection for books that were about them. They would either read books about kids who were younger than them, if that was their reading level, or they would read up and they would read young adult. And sometimes young adult is wonderful and like a beautiful reading experience, and other times it is actually really adult. I've had kids like bring Stephen King to class, and like whatever their parents are fine with them reading, I'm fine with them reading. But there seemed to be quite a gap, and so I knew I wanted to write about kids, the kind of kids I teach at that age, for that age. Which is what I like about upper middle grade, which Josh, I know you write upper middle grade as well. And Jacqueline, I know you've written young adult and middle grade. I wish there was more, because I wish it was marketed more as well as a specific thing, so that kids knew where to find those books and which books were actually about 7th and 8th graders, because so many middle grade books are, about 12-year-olds, but they're really meant for like 8-year-old readers. It gets a little murky, but I guess because, to answer your question, I teach 7th and 8th grade, I wanted to write about kids who were in 7th and 8th grade. And then in the Fright Watch series, like, you'll see them in book 2, it takes place in the fall, so they're now in 8th grade. Book 3, it takes place on Halloween, they're in 8th grade. I have no idea if they're going to let me publish the 6 that I want to publish, but if I do, it will show them through graduating middle school.
That's cool. Yeah, I never thought about them aging up. This could be one of those where it's like, and then in book 20, they're, they just got divorced. Like, I don't know.
Oh, in mind.
Just kidding, not them. No. Yeah, that would be so funny. But you do capture that voice so perfectly, like we were talking about. And there is a pretty strong, like super awkward romantic element. So, which I love. And I don't think you don't necessarily see that too much in middle grade. Like there's some awkward crushes. I've done an awkward crush one time, which was really fun. But was it important to you, or did you have just like a lot of fun, like getting all of those really awkward moments in there, like the dance and just like everything?
That's when being a middle school teacher really came in handy, because they're just like the beginning of 7th grade, you know, they're essentially 6th graders, 11-year-olds who come in, and it's like they just stay away from each other. You just stay in their little packs of friends. And then all of a sudden, after the holidays, you start to see them mingling a little more, and it's very awkward. And then by spring, it's like all bets are off, and they're all like all over each other in the hallway, and it's disgusting. And school dances are just... The only school dance that my school oddly has is a Halloween dance, for whatever reason. So that's kind of where I wanted a Halloween dance. I have one in the 3rd book, but I wanted some kind of Halloween element just because I like Halloween. So I did the Come As Your Favorite Holiday dance. But that awkwardness, that's like the one thing that everybody can agree on about middle school, is that it is awkward and uncomfortable, and just those little moments of, oh, do they like me? Do they not like me? It just was so fun to write.
Yes, and captured so perfectly. Well, Jacqueline, I will send it over to you.
Well, since you brought it up, I hope I'm not blowing this way before the end, but I would love to hear a little bit about the next ones that are coming up. I know the next one is called The Collectors, which is funny because we share a title. And by the way, in my YA that I'm currently working on, there's a sort of eerie group of people called the Oldies. So apparently we just like...
Our books are best friends. Because I had the Stitchers was named Bits and Pieces. I hate titling stuff. I don't know if you guys like making titles. I hate it. So to the point where I was like, oh, I don't even care what I call this book, because Abrams is going to change it anyways. The series title was originally South Haven Mysteries, which is just like not fun at all. So Fright Watch is way cooler. I know, isn't that Bits and Pieces South Haven Mysteries? Like, it just sounds ridiculous. And so I emailed Jacqueline when I found out that it was going to be The Collectors. I was like, I'm so sorry. But now I feel like our books are friends. But yeah, so book 2, what was your question? I'm sorry.
I wanted to hear more about The Collectors, and maybe if you can even tell us a teeny bit about, because you're working on 3 right now, right? Like you teased that on Instagram lately. So yeah, I just want to know a little bit about what's coming.
Yeah, it is such a weird thing to like be trying to promote The Collectors when my mind is like completely submerged in book 3. Like it's weird. I feel like oh, this old thing, and it's not even out. So The Collectors kind of picks up where Quinn and Mike leave off. They thwart the Oldies like around the 4th of July, and then The Collectors picks up literally right when 8th grade starts. And so they have different neighbors who you see in the epilogue of book 1. You see them move in, and this one isn't as much of a mystery. Like in book 1, I wanted to keep it a mystery as to who the Oldies really were and what they really were doing. Book 2, it's pretty evident from the cover. They're ghosts. And it's a ghost cult. And they're trying to take Lex, who is one of Quinn's besties in book 1. And so this kind of picks up with the aftermath of like, we just defeated these demons for all intents and purposes. Like, how do we get over that? Especially when we see that it might be happening again. And so she's still dealing with the grief of her father. Because one thing I remember when I was a kid, I loved R.L. Stine books. I still read them as my like comfort read. But I would get a little bit annoyed if it was the same characters in a series and it would like pretend like whatever happened last week just never happened again. So I wanted to make sure that like Quinn's grief is still very present, and that their trauma from like dealing with the Oldies is actually woven in. So I tried to do that. And along the way, you meet very, very quickly a girl named Marion Jones, who is referred to as a monster maker, who does like all the Halloween makeups for kids around Halloween. And I fell in love with this kind of throwaway character when I was writing it. And so that is what book 3 is about. It's actually not through Quinn's point of view. It's through Marion's, as she creates monster makeups for the Halloween dance. And the one that she is most proud of is like this full mask, and she names it Winston. It's this big sea creature, and her crush puts it on and it possesses him. So then he goes to the dance and she has to save him in the school, and Quinn and Mike are obviously there. And because they have this history with the supernatural and they know that something is definitely up with South Haven, like something magical happens here, they kind of team up with her. So then if this series goes on, Marion becomes part of Operation Ghost Hunter, and they, kind of continue to solve mysteries together. And a lot of people have been asking me lately, like, what is up with Goody Lane? And I'm happy to answer that. It's going to be answered a little more in like the later books, but this is kind of a spoiler. So if anyone is at home or watching this, hasn't read the Stitchers, just mute me for like a minute. I'll wave when I'm done. But so since Bee's mother was the witch who kind of cursed everything and gave Bee her power, when she was burned and put in the pond, she is still there, as we see in the Stitchers. She kind of unlocked, in my mind, she's unlocked this supernatural portal to let all these things in South Haven kind of come out. So if magic is going to live in Connecticut, it's going to be in South Haven. So until these kids close that portal and get rid of Sarah Goody for good, then South Haven is just going to have a time. All right, I'm done, friends at home.
I love that as someone who's also writing a series set in a small town, like finding what's the reason that these things keep happening here. So I love that. I love the whole mythology that we've come up with, and sort of the vision that you have for it. And so you keep alluding to these later books in the series. If the series continues, how far have you worked out like what you would do in terms of like, which monsters per which book? And, I think it's really interesting.
I have all of them. I have the fourth book.
What came first, the idea for the first couple of books, or the whole series sort of, did it just arrive kind of formed in your mind what you wanted to do?
In the Stitchers, Quinn, when she's originally trying to figure out what the oldies are, she throws out a bunch of different things. She's like, maybe they're aliens, maybe they're day vampires, maybe they're ghosts, maybe they're this. And then I wrote that because I was like, I want each one of those to end up being a book. So when I wrote the Stitchers, I had book 6. Like I knew how I would want it to end. When I came up with Sarah Goody, I was like, if I'm allowed to continue this, then this is how I want them to like eventually just close the portal and it be done. So now I'm kind of filling in the middle.
So no pressure, but we basically need to make sure everyone is buying your book so that we get to see what happens.
Yeah, just a little, because they're fun. Otherwise, I'll just put them on my website. I got permission to do, I asked my editor if I can write a Stitcher's Christmas story and just put it on my website for free at the holidays, where you could see them at Christmas time in the 50s being creepy. And I got permission, so you could look for that in December. I just got to write it, but...
That's so awesome. I know. I feel like it doesn't have, hopefully they'll just keep buying them, but either way, it doesn't have to end because you've kind of created your own like Fear Street or Goosebumps like franchise. Like now we have Fright Watch and we have Goody Lane, and you have this thing where you can do the recurring cast of characters that kind of alternates around. And how fun is that? Because you can continually add to this world. And I mean, have you like cast the TV series in your mind yet, or do you just not go there? Like,
I don't go there. I wish.
Yeah, I think that's a dangerous game, but what a cool like series it would be. So I mean, it's so interesting to me. Like you started with such a huge world full of so many possibilities. Do you ever see yourself like moving away from it and doing like a standalone or like doing something radically different from this?
Yes, I have a chapter book and a young adult book. I think it's hard for me to think outside of Fright Watch for middle grade. So when I'm So I'm trying to go into different categories, like in between. I'm one of those people, I have to always have a project. Kim, I'm assuming you're like that. Because you like more than I do, and I thought I wrote a lot. But like, I have to always have a project. It helps with my anxiety. It helps me feel like, okay, like I'm constantly have something on deck. I don't know if it comes from years of rejection where I was like, well, they hated that one, but look what else I got everybody. Like, I always want something on deck or 10 things on deck. And so my pieces on deck are a young adult werewolf story, which is like, I met my husband when I studied abroad in England in this like artsy seaside town called Brighton. And I always wanted to write like a study abroad story, but I put werewolves in it. And then a chapter book, which is spooky and kind of cute. And I have no idea what I'm doing in either of these genres, so they might never see the light of day, but they were really fun. So I do like to explore worlds outside of South Haven, but that's a lie because they're kind of all set in the South Haven universe. So the girl in the werewolf story is originally from Valport, which is where Grandma Jane is from. And then the chapter book is set in South Haven, but it's kids at the elementary school. And that helps me just build the lore in my mind.
That's so cool though, because you could have kids that like grow up reading you from elementary, middle school, high school. Next, you got to do adult. Like, that's so awesome. But I know like there are a lot, because we talk to a lot of educators. So if people don't know, we offer spooky visits for students, and those are really, really fun. But a lot of those educators that ends up are also writing books, and you're an educator who's writing all of these books. So do you have advice for people who feel like everything, like they're just overwhelmed with teaching or with whatever your day job is and stuff, and how do you get the time and like keep the motivation to write?
I don't have a lot of time. I don't. Time is stressful. You can probably hear anytime I do Zooms and things, I always have to say, you're going to hear my kids and my dogs or something in the background. And teaching last year was really, really hard, like really hard. Like, I'm very nervous to go back on Thursday because it was that hard. But writing is the one thing that helps me. So like if I have a really rough day at school, or like things at school feel really, really challenging, my drive home, I'll like put on a playlist that has something to do with my story, and it will start to, I can shift my focus to a different world, like literally. Which is why I think I've written so much during the pandemic, because I know some people, like rightfully so, shut down when things get difficult. I have a lot of writer friends who they found it incredibly hard to write during the pandemic, and I totally understand that. For me, it was the opposite. It was almost manic. Like, so when the teaching world gets hard, and it really does, I don't know, for me, it feels like a little bit of a comfort to go home and write something that has nothing to do with anything in my day job. And I've been writing a lot more by hand. I know I've been saying that a lot over the last year, but that's because I don't have a lot of time to sit in my office and actually type things. But if I'm like waiting for the pot to boil, if I'm making dinner, I can have like a little notebook next to me and I can just jot things down. So that's kind of how I've gotten through. So any teachers out there, I love you. It's hard right now. Just keep doing the little bits that you can. And yeah.
I love that. I think that's how I think of it too. It's like the writing is kind of my meditative escape. Like, it gets my brain in the right place. And so it's helpful in that way. But yes, everyone is different. And let's give everyone, I know we're almost out of time. So if anyone does have a question who's watching live, go ahead and get that in there now. And then I'll give everyone else on the panel a chance to ask one final burning question. Adriana, I know there's too many to choose from, but do you have a final question?
Maybe. Okay, there. I gotta think, because I guess I'm so excited that there are more Stitcher's books, well, Fright Watch books coming, but I still stand by my poor dear Quinn and my need for her to relocate. But you've explained your lore well now and why she needs to stay there and everything, so I support that. I guess the teacher in you, for students that say they're not readers and want to read perhaps a spooky book. You don't have to pick anybody on this panel tonight, but like, what are some of your favorite books to recommend to your students who like swear up and down that they're not readers? Like, what are the books that you find get them hooked?
I will say yours. Everybody.
No.
It's true though. I had a student who was like, I hate to read. Well, what do you like? I like animals. I was like, oh, do you like talking, sarcastic, kind of mean animals? Yeah. Okay. Here's Nestor. They loved it. Someone else who was like, I hate reading. What do you like? I don't know. I kind of like friendship stories, but I don't like friendship stories. Okay. This is why teaching is difficult, because you have to try to figure out, what does that mean? And then I took it as they don't like contemporary, realistic. So I gave them Josh's book. Like, it's just, it really is true. I do love everybody's book in our spooky middle grade group. And that's one thing I will add to my teacher statement before, or really anybody who's trying to write, you got to find your writing community. Just like kids in a classroom have to find their reading community and like readers, and they can recommend books to each other. That's what like this is for me. Finding, my spooky middle grade friends and other middle grade friends who write in the same genre as me and category. It's like life-changing to have those conversations and to get recommendations. I've discovered so many new books through being in this group, and there has not been one in our genre that I haven't liked. Not one. I can't think. Not one that has come out in the last 2 years. So I don't know. I'm pretty happy with recommending any spooky middle grade book at this point.
I'm just thinking the sequel that I'm working on, maybe the first one, you might be like, nope, terrible.
Okay, well, I'll be like, I love all the books except for Josh's secret.
But so speaking of things related to writing books, I think my final question for you is just, can you talk a little bit about your journey to publication and what it was like to to go through that process? Because I know for most of us, it was not just like write the first draft and then it's published. There's a lot of perseverance through that. So what was it like for you?
I wanted to be I decided I wanted to write books when I was 6 and didn't know what that meant. Would just write things for fun. And then I went to college, and my degree is my degrees are in English and writing and teaching. And there was a strong literary fiction is what we want everybody to do in all of these programs. And that was really boring for me. And I wasn't having any fun like I was when I was a kid. And then when I was 21, I think I started sending out my first queries for these awful books that I understand why they were all rejected. I also didn't really have a writing community. Like when I left college, I wasn't on social media yet. I think Facebook was kind of just a thing, but I hated it. And so I didn't have a writing community. I was kind of in this silo, and middle grade wasn't big. It really wasn't. Children's literature wasn't really, there was Harry Potter and old stuff, and there wasn't much else coming out. And so I was just writing the wrong books for a really long time. So it wasn't until my dad passed away when I was 27 or 28. And I was like, I just want to have fun now. I need to have fun with what I'm doing. I was working in marketing at the time and I hated it. I hated my day job. So that's when I was like, I'm going to become a teacher and do something I actually am excited about. And I'm going to make my whole life around books. And so that's what I did. And then took me 10 years to get an agent from Active Querying. That agent then quit. Then I got another agent. That agent quit 2 weeks before I got my book deal from Abrams. So we had been on submission for all these other books. And then she kind of just sent out the Stitchers. And then was like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm going to be freelance now. I'm quitting. And I was like, okay. And then Abrams bought it. So that was the book I had the most fun writing. So I'm really thrilled I got to debut with it, even though I debuted in a pandemic, which was scary and awkward, but it is what it is. So it was a long time, I guess, but I think it needed to be a long time because it took me a long time to kind of get my act together and to figure out what I wanted to write.
I feel like we've never heard the story before. That's like
About all my agents.
yeah, that's
Mommy
an
heard.
epic story. Wow. But I so get that about like needing time to figure out what you even want to write. Like I still feel like I'm doing that and I have like 4 books out. So it's like it's still happening. But Jacqueline, do you have a final?
Yeah, sure. And mine is both fluff and nosy. I just want to know what you did when Stephen King blurbed your book.
Well, this was inappropriate. This is like I was in my classroom and my editor knows I adore my editor. Like I hear stories about people's editors who don't respond, and like I love her, and she knows I teach during the day, so usually her emails would be like, after school hours or something like that. And so I had my phone out because I was timing. They were doing like a timed writing assignment or something, and so like, oh, you have 3 minutes left, and on it, my notification popped up from Emily, my editor, and her subject line, because she knows I teach, her subject line in all caps was like, Stephen King is reading your arc. So obviously I was super professional and I opened it and like read it and freaked out. And I was like, oh, he has it. Like he technically has it, but it's going to sit on his desk. I've seen pictures of his desk. It's a mess. It's never going to be read. And then like a week or 2 later, it was the same kind of thing. I swear I'm not on my phone in the classroom, but I was timing them. And it happened again. And this subject line was, Stephen King loved your book. And I was with the same group of 8th graders and they freaked out. And it was like this lovely little moment that we kind of had together. So I was in the classroom being a really bad teacher when I sent those emails.
Oh, I love that so much, and I love.
They probably don't remember a thing I taught them that year, but they might remember that.
They'll remember that.
I love that though, Lauren, because I think I told you when I went to pick your book up, because like during the pandemic, my indie bookstore was closed, but you would just like text them that you had ordered a book and they would bring it out to you. And so I had ordered your book and my dad rode with me to go pick it up. And so I got your book and I handed it to my dad and I said, Dad, look who is on the cover, like who blurbed her book. The expletive in multiple languages that my father let out when he saw this, like he doesn't know you, but like he thought you were just like the be all end all of authors now. So in his mind, you were like,
I didn't know that. That is the cutest thing. Oh, that is so sweet. I love that.
Oh, that's so amazing. I love it. It's so wild though to think it was just like it was on his desk and he actually read this book and blurbed it. What? I think your students cannot be like all like blasé now about you. They have to like be super excited. This year they're gonna like ask you to sign their faces in Sharpie and stuff like that. They're gonna love it. And especially, so you told us before this came out that your second book, The Collectors, comes out the same day that school comes back. Is that right? Oh, wow.
Yep. So I go back this Thursday and then my students come the day The Collectors comes out. So it will be, I probably won't be very cool. I'll probably be a mess. You see me for what I am.
So that is going to be wild, but do you want to tell people where they can find you, or is there anything happening for the Collectors coming out where they can join you?
I'm doing my first ever in-person thing. It's like a hybrid at RJ Julia Booksellers, which is in Connecticut, and one of my author friends, Janae Marks, who does not write spooky things, she writes very sweet things. She's coming with me and we're going to chat, but you can also come virtually. If you want a signed copy, I'll be signing them there. They have the Stitchers paperback and the Collectors. And you can find me anywhere. I'm all over Instagram. Less on Twitter, never on Facebook, but yeah, Lorien Lawrence.
All over Instagram. I love it. And you can find us online too, spookymiddlegrade.com. If you are a teacher and you want to have 4 amazing spooky authors visit with your students and answer all of their burning writing and publishing questions, we would love to do so. And I mentioned it earlier, but our book for next month is going to be The Witches of Willow, Cove by Josh Roberts. So I hope you'll join us. I'm going to play us out like on a little song, and you'll have the date up there for that, so you can jot that down. But before we go, a huge thank you to Lorien for joining us and to all of our amazing panelists. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great spooky evening. Bye.